world where achievements and accolades motivate us to do more and be more, we're often left wondering, is this really it?
Deep inside, you know there is more to life. You're ready to leave behind the old, push your way through, and claim the deeper life that's calling you.
That's where we excel.
We're your hosts, Stephanie Allen
and Maren and
and this is the Soulful Leader Podcast.
Sit back and relax as we share the shortcuts we've uncovered to help you make shift happen. Welcome back to the Soulful Leader Podcast. This is Maren and I'm here with Stephanie Allen. And today we were talking about slow learners and how being a slow learner is actually the preferred way to be. I think that Stephanie and I have both felt like that a lot lately, like slow learners, a lot lately. And we really sat down and discussed what are the pros and cons of being a slow learner. And I think this is going to be a fun episode today.
And I think, for those of you who are listening out there, we have these judgments around learning about where we should or shouldn't be in our lives, where we are right now. And, the intention of this podcast is that hopefully if there's areas that you're feeling that you're really hard on yourself right now, that you're actually going to pat yourself on the back afterwards and going, wow, this is a real important area of my life that I've chosen to go deeper with. So we're glad you're here and listening.
It's very exciting. One of the things that, so today this has been up for both me and Stephanie a lot. And today I was on a class and I heard somebody else use that term and they said, well, I've been working with this particular coach for 13 years. And he continued to say, I'm a slow learner. And this is a brilliant speaker talking about working with his speaking coach for the last 12 or 13 years. And I think about that. And here's an multiple award-winning speaking coach or speaker, multiple award-winning speaker, and he's calling himself a slow learner. And what Stephanie said just a moment ago of we're so hard on ourselves. We don't acknowledge that it's because we're slow learners that we become award winners. And here's what I mean by that. I read a book recently, and it was all about talking about how when we learn something quickly, we also forget it quickly. Because
that's a key. Because how many times have you been with somebody and they pick up, a language really quickly, or they pick up a concept really quickly, and you're sitting there going, what the heck is the matter with me? Am I freaking stupid? How come I don't get this? And I've heard this 20 times and I still don't get it. That's my own inner mind talk that I'm just revealed to you about me. But I'm serious. And yet when I get like that, I go, okay, obviously there's something really important to me to learn here. Can I go deeper with it? And can I literally reprogram my brain differently? Because how many times, if you think back at, college or high school, or you had to cram for an exam and you stayed up all night the night before, again, I'm going to reveal another vulnerability. I would rather be talking to everybody rather than studying. So I would literally procrastinate until the last hour. And then I would go, oh my God, I got to cram for this exam. And I would stuff as much information in as I can. And then I would go and I'd write the exam. And afterwards, it's like as if I shook my head. It'd be like one of those little etch-a-sketches that you used to draw, and then you shake it and the whole picture goes away. That's exactly what would have happened with my cram for the exam. And there's certain things in my life that my heart and soul really want mastery with. Like there's some very things, and I can be extremely hard on myself with, I got to learn this. What's wrong with me? Why am I not getting this? It's so important to me. And I love what you just said, Maren, about that when you quickly learn something, you can quickly forget it.
yeah.
Or when it quickly comes, you don't tend to also value it or appreciate it in the way and savor it, because it's like when you've worked hard and long for something, oh my gosh, the sweetness is so good, isn't it?
It really is. And I just want to point out that so much of this is comparison. And when you said earlier that, how many of us have been around somebody who gets something quickly and we wonder what's wrong with me? And when I say that when you learn something quickly, you forget it quickly, it's not necessarily a judgment on that other person, because what we don't know about that other person is how many years they've studied that particular thing. I know as a dance professional, I've invested 30 years of my life learning and doing dance and also learning how to teach it. And I can't tell you how many people compare themselves to me, my students. Oh my God, you do that so effortlessly. You do that so beautifully. I'm not good. I can't get it. And it's like, as a teacher, I see how quickly people get things and don't get things. It's like you can't compare. I will learn something in dance infinitely more quickly than somebody else does because I've spent 30 years doing it. So it's not a fair comparison. So when I say that if you learn something quickly, you forget it quickly, it's not in your domain, right? I'm talking about the cramming that you were mentioning earlier of like, I know nothing about this. I'm going to cram my brain full of it so that I can take a test. And when they've done studies on those people, and there's tons of studies out there around this, they've done studies, it's like 10% of the people remember 10% of the person, like I'm making up percentages to be honest, but it just is some ridiculously low amount of information that we actually remember. And so I love what you just said, Stephanie, around if it matters to us. I'm not saying that you should learn everything slowly. There are some things that it doesn't matter if, okay, you know what? I actually don't care if I retain that information. Terrific. There will be other things that matter to me.
Yeah.
My business, my dancing, my relationships,
Yeah.
my spirituality. It's like, and so to take the time, it's so important. And what actually brought this up, why Stephanie and I have been talking about having this conversation on a podcast for probably a few months now. And what brought it up is a recognition that both of us have been with our spiritual teacher for 25 years. And we did that podcast, I think it's episode 67 with Jill and Daniel. And so we're on, I don't know, podcast number 70 something at this point. And so since then, Stephanie and I have been like, oh my gosh, we're slow learners. And I just want to take a moment.
He repeats himself over and over again. I've heard him over 25 years,
Yeah.
but I'm not the same person hearing it again. And I keep getting different levels of it and different levels of it.
Yeah.
And so I can beat myself up on one level and say I'm a slow learner because I've been here for 30 years and I'm still not really taking it to the depth that I want to. But that's also my level of intention.
Hmm.
It's like when there's something that has meaning to me and I'm really, really, really passionate about it. I could repeat it. It's like when you think of a child and they watch their favorite cartoon or movie and they have to watch it like 20 times and they know every word of it. And you're like, why are we watching this again? But there's something there's something in it that they absolutely love and it's feeding their soul. And to have that childlike wonder with something you've seen 30 times,
Hmm.
to me, that's magic. That is magic. And so when you can go to work and it's a bright new day and you're like, wow, I get to go to work. And even though you might be doing quote unquote the same old activities, you're not the same person and you're involved in it and you're in that place of surprise and wonder because now you're open to learning, you're open to growth. And it's the same with a relationship. It's like you might have heard that the people that you love that say the same old story over and over and over again. You're like, oh, here comes that story again. We know how this one all turns out. But because you love them, you're already laughing before even the third word out of their mouth has come out, And to me, that is the beauty of slow learning. And that's the beauty of slowing everything down and taking it at a deeper level and listening it from a different part of your soul. Because it's so multi-level, isn't it?
That's the key, is that it's multi-level, and our society treats it like it's one level. Like we're
Flatland again.
flatland. We mentioned it last week on the podcast, flatland, and that we're all on the same level, working on the same thing, and we're not. And when you're with something for years and years and years, you actually create space for more information. So what's important is if you imagine an animation. So old time animation, say an old Disney cartoon, for example, there would be a lot of space between one animation and the next animation. So you would see like glitches, right, between the two. Newer animation, there's a lot more information in between each of those frames. So it looks seamless now from one to another. When we're watching animation, it barely looks like animation anymore because it's not hand drawn and there's all kinds of information between those two frames.
Very complex.
Very complex. And what happens is when we slow down and we're slow learners, and we take the time to really study deeply, the space in between the frames actually opens up and there's more information between each of those frames. So for me as a master dancer, when I do something and somebody watches me and it looks fluid and seamless and effortless, it's because I have more space and I have more information in between those 2 points of contact. Whereas a beginner dancer looks a little bit clunky and a little bit, like, not as comfortable and not as fluid because from point A to point B, there's less information. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So the benefits of being a slow learner is the mastery. You don't get mastery when you do something like that. It just is not possible.
Yeah, it doesn't create those deep wiring, that deep rewiring of the brain. And when you do something repetitively over and over and over again, that becomes your new default. And meaning it's like I say this a lot of times with clients. I'll say, one of the greatest things that you can do for yourself to get yourself out of stress is to slow your breath down.
Hmm.
But the thing is, when we are in stress, we forget to slow our breath down. But that is a huge hack. So the only way you're going to default onto slowing your breath down is if you practice it ongoingly when you don't need it. I would say you practice it when you don't need it so you'll remember it when you do.
Hmm. That really makes me think about when so often when we're listening to somebody, we immediately say, "Oh, I know that. I got that. I know that. I do that. I'm already there. I've already heard that." And we dismiss it instead of listening for, okay, I may have heard that. And this is, going back to our own teacher, I may have heard that 100 times. What's the new layer or lesson or information? Is there a reason I'm hearing it again? Because I'm not the same person. I will hear it from a different place and it will mean something different to me.
Well, one of
And
the
when,
practices that our teachers Daniel has been giving us is like, if you didn't have a past, if you didn't have a past and you were hearing this for the very first time, how would it land differently? And that's such a great practice to have in every area of your life, even if you were with yourself with that, of like, gee, instead of beating myself up, like going, oh, I've tried this 100 times and why am I not getting it? Because that tends to be where our itty bitty shitty committee goes, right? If you do something and it doesn't turn out the way you had hoped, you know, what if that was the first time you didn't have a past and you could be
Mm.
open to the possibility of learning something about yourself and being kind to yourself instead of beating yourself up? Imagine if you could see your spouse or your boss or your coworker, your child, as if they didn't have a past and you got to see them for the very first time and you got to be curious and get to know them. Like, it's such a rich experience. You might be surprised and delighted by who shows up.
The other thing that makes me think about, because I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs in our audience, is, you know, we see, all of us see online what seems like a lot of, like, we see a lot of success, right? And one of the things that I had heard, and I've heard years and years and years, is there is no such thing as overnight success. Anytime that you look into an quote unquote air quotes overnight success, you'll find years and years of failure and putting more work in and doing it again and, like, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
So when you were talking about that, one of the things I was thinking of is, as entrepreneurs, we see this immediate success, or what seems like immediate success, out there on the internet and in lives. And we knock on a door, or we make a phone call, or we make 10 phone calls, and we think, oh, I'm a failure. We've made a judgment about it.
Mhm.
And if we could take that practice into our lives of, what if I didn't have a past? I wouldn't have made those 10 calls. I wouldn't have made that judgment about myself, And so making that next call, or contacting that next person, wouldn't come from an I'm a failure place in me, or from a lack place in me of, like, oh, this is number 11, or this is number 100, and it's going to be the same old, same old. I could come from a different place and really step in differently. And now the other person will hear a different energy in my voice,
Mhm.
because I don't have that
Coming from
past.
a
That's
different
not who
place,
I was.
and it's
Yeah,
from a different
exactly.
place. It reminds me a lot too of The Talent Code, the book,
Mm,
Daniel Coyle, and it talks about, it takes 10,000 hours to actually create mastery, and that's about 3 hours a day for 10 years. So, what is it that you would love and would have enough meaning and purpose to you to show up every single day for 3 hours and to work it? And when I
mm.
say work, I'm not talking about like struggle and strive, but there is a lot of work. It doesn't feel like that when you love something or when it matters to you. And sometimes we have to make that reminder in our own brain, in our own hearts and soul, to say, wait a minute, this is really important to me. This is really important to me. I love this. I love this person, or I love this skill, or I love this opportunity. And to really show up and literally prune yourself from the things that you need to unlearn, the things that you want to become more skillful or masterful at. It's going to take practice. It doesn't just happen with your eyes shut. It does take continual practice. And, Daniel talks a lot about drifting, thinking about, we just drift. We drift in relationships. We drift in our careers, our vocations. We drift in our intentions.
Mm.
And the problem with drifting is that, n- you know, over years, over time, you're a long, 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 long way from where you are probably your soul is meant to be. Now, what'll happen in those instances is that, because it doesn't matter where you go, there's no right or wrong. It's like it isn't a straight line home. If you get way, 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 way drifting, you're gonna get whacked pretty darn hard to get you back into center. And it doesn't have to happen that way. You
No,
can
there are
use a little
nudges
love
along
tap.
the
Yeah, I
lines.
call them love
Right.
taps. If you're practicing, and that slow learner is actually one of the greatest advantages, like slowing down and paying attention and tracking it and talking about it and integrating it, making it a part of your daily practice, your daily life. It allows you the nuances. We talk a lot about figuring things out. That's flatland language, you know? I got to figure it out. I got to figure out what I got to do. And I got to figure out what my plan is for quarter 3. And I got to figure out my diet plan. And I got to figure out, like, no, you can't figure it out. I say this all the time to my clients. If you could have figured out how to heal yourself, you would have already. You're smart enough.
Yeah.
Healing does not happen from your past. It happens from your future. But we need to create space to be able to allow the future to come in. And maybe Maren, you might want to talk a little bit about presencing one's future rather than drifting, and why slow learning might even be so essential to be able to stay present to the emerging future.
I had a post-it on my monitor for a good 4 months that said, slow down to speed up. And that's one of those things where we see it and we go, yeah, I know that. And then we quickly move on to something, the next thing that's the outer to do that we're told we're supposed to do. And multiple times on this podcast, Stephanie, you have mentioned the fact that 97% of what happens in our outer world is actually determined by our inner, and only
Correct?
3% is what happens because of what we do on the outer. And that's a crazy percentage. Like, take a moment and digest that. All the energy that we put into doing what's next based on, and one of the things that Stephanie just mentioned is our past, right? So we've learned something in our past and we keep putting energy into doing that something that we learned from our past to create a future. And we don't know what the future is going to look like. And so a different way of looking at that would be to slow down and breathe for a moment. And when we talk about practices, that practice that you mentioned about breathing, taking a moment, practicing when you don't need it, to slow down and breathe. And presence, when I say presence, what I mean is it's truly an awareness practice. So do me a favor, if you're not driving, pick up something in your hand, like a pen or a pencil, or even your cell phone. But if it's something that you're not going to get distracted by the screen, that's better. And what I think about doing, this is an awareness practice, is literally rolling the thing around in your hand and feeling every nuance of it and doing it as slowly as possible. And really, like, what does that feel like? What's the surface feel like? I want you to also go to the point where it's like, without licking it, what does it taste like? What does it smell like? Like, a color will have a smell and a taste, and it's like using your imagination. So now you've engaged all of your senses into this object, and you've slowed everything down in your world into this one moment in time and this object. And that's being present. You're practicing presence in that moment. And if you're going to live into a future that we don't know yet, instead of taking and putting my past in front of me and living that past, what if we started to be present to the incoming future? Because, and this is cool, because science has actually started to prove that the wave from the future has more influence on us than our past.
Which is so powerful, you all that are listening, who are, suffering from past traumas. And I don't just mean like trauma. I mean, even just like the belief of who you think you used to be and why you're not that now. Like, just think like what is coming in the future for you in a way that is inspiring and delightful and possible. Doesn't have to be a doom and gloom future unless you choose it to be. We often take our past and keep throwing it in front of us. That's a little bit of
Yeah.
slow learner too, until you realize, like, oh, wait a minute, I've seen this rerun of my life just a few too many times. And then you say, well, wait, maybe I need to stop throwing my past in front and stop, drop everything, breathe, and be open and present, like Maren is suggesting, being present to what is happening. There's so much magic going on. So much magic. I'll share something very vulnerable. I just lost my 15 and a half year old kitty, who was a delightful cat. I mean, I always say, not so talk about slow learner. He was a very slow learner. He was just like Mr. Chill. Never, like, it would be a snowstorm outside, he would never run at all, ever fast, ever, even for treats. He was just like, they'll be there. But he was so dropped in and chill. Anyway, he unfortunately was getting older, and he got hit by a car here just a few weeks ago, and my heart was broken. But I had a dream one night, and he came to me and he kind of kissed me on my forehead, and he said, nothing is ever lost. Nothing. Like, this whole outer world is an illusion. Nothing's ever lost. He said, I've sacrificed my physical life so that, and his name, by the way, was Magic.
Hmm.
I've sacrificed my physical life so that you could have magic in yours. And that is true. It's like there was sadness and joy at the same time, of like, when I talk about making space, we have to slow down to make space. When our heart breaks, it isn't our heart that breaks, it's our ego that breaks. And I determine ego as an acronym for edging good out. That's what ego is. It keeps us safe, it keeps us protected. We need one, but sometimes, it's necessary. Or you could also put it as edging God out if you are more of a spiritual way of going. So when my heart broke of losing my kitty, Magic, my ego broke. And then I was able to be receptive to the multiple levels. But if I had had a preconceived idea that, my life was bad and wrong and bad and that, and I did something awful, I would have blocked myself from being open to the possibility of what was coming in the future. And I'm still in that place of, like, I know there's still more magic to be coming in my future. And so to allow myself to be open to that, I have to let go of my past, and I have to be present in the moment. And that is a slow learning practice I've had for myself. But because I want it, I really want to own it. I want to be present. I don't want to forget, because I do. I do. That's human. And I don't want to forget. I want to remember, and I want to be present with it. So I'm willing to take the long, slow, deep road to that way.
I think also when you were talking earlier about drift happens for all of us. Like you were just saying, I forget. We were taught
Mhm.
something and you're like, oh, I forget. And there are a bunch of nudges that bring us back. And that's okay. That's part of the slow learning process of when you take your time and get nudged back, you the importance of it comes back and you're like, oh, yeah, I wanted that for a reason. And being reminded of one of the things that our teacher Daniel talks a lot about is intention. And what is the intention? And it's sometimes easy to forget. We have an intention, we start on it, and then, shiny object, very cool thing over there. And so we get distracted and then we're like, oh, right, I wanted this. Why did I want that again? And going more deeply into that why, because it takes us into the deeper, richer world. You had, Stephanie, you had talked at one point in one of our podcasts about if you want to be a huge, great tree, the larger, the taller the tree, the deeper the roots have to go. Same thing for a skyscraper. If we want to build a huge vertical skyscraper, guess what? That means that thing has to go really deeply into the earth. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about slow learners. It's not so much slow. I want to reframe it.
Yeah,
I want to call it deep learners because we're going so deeply into something that it takes time. And I personally want to take a moment and celebrate that and
I
say,
agree. I like that. I like that. Let's
good for
change
us.
the language, the words that we are using,
Yeah,
because it isn't slow learner, it's deep learner.
it
It's
is deep
broad
learner.
learner.
And I do. I want everybody out there to take a moment and celebrate all the places in your life where you've chosen to be a deep learner. And yeah, let's coin a new term. So we're deep learners now.
I love it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I would like to invite you all to a practice that is a deep learning practice that Stephanie and I have done for probably, I know for myself, I've done it about 10 or 12 years. Stephanie, how long have you been doing it?
About the same. I think publicly I've been doing it for the last 3 years. And it's based on what they would call the traditions of the 12 days of Christmas. We're calling it the Great Uplift because it is about a way of dropping into presencing what's coming in the future for the upcoming year. So
And
we're,
also because it's a deepening practice that allows us to go higher, right? So
right,
it's
that's
one of
right.
those places, and this is exactly what we've been talking about. And we're calling it the Great Uplift, and it is based on the tradition of the 12 days of Christmas. And I was honored to do it publicly with Stephanie last year, and we will be
Yeah.
doing that again.
So how we started out, if you're interested, we start on the solstice. We do a little solstice party on Zoom, and it's all free. We just want
It's
to
all
literally
free
offer it. It's our giveaway. We do a little gathering on the solstice, and we just reflect back on the year that we've come from and what we learned and how we've grown, how we've changed, and maybe some areas that we would like to maybe improve upon, or where we want to be more open to the possibilities of the future. And then there are little practices that when you sign up, we give little practices that you do each day, beginning on Christmas Eve and then moving right through till the Epiphany.
for
And
12 days.
for
Imagine
12
that.
days, imagine that. And each day is representing a snapshot of the month in the following year. So there's lots of really fun things you can do with that. And I hope that you'll join us with that, because on the Epiphany party, we get to celebrate and we share all the little insights that happen. And throughout the year, if you return back and you look at it, it'll give you guidance, such loving, incredible guidance to help you in your life with whatever
And
you want to work with and go deep with.
one of the things that Stephanie had mentioned earlier is that it is a practice for learning and starting to presence the future. And we were talking about that earlier in the podcast of like, so what does that mean? How do we presence this incoming future and let go of the past that we were talking about? One of the exercises that we gave earlier in the podcast was, waking up and being like, what if I had no past? Or, if we're going to do something and we're in our mind talk, what if I had no past? Another exercise is this presencing for those 12 days, because each of those days represents a month in the next year. So it's a phenomenal exercise. And the deeper that we go with it, Stephanie and I, we're getting more and more out of it. And we're excited to share it. Like we said, it is free. And we would love to have you join us in it. So if you're wondering, all of the information is on the front page of our website, thesoulfulleaderpodcast.com. There will also be a link directly to the page, which is the Great Uplift, in the show notes. So I know there will be information in our Facebook group and in our LinkedIn group as well. So if you're interested, we would love to have you join us next month. So wonderful. With that, we would love to thank you for joining us today, and we wish you the best of deep learning this week. Please share your insights with us in our Facebook group or in our LinkedIn group. And we'll see you all next week on the Soulful Leader Podcast.
And that wraps up another episode of the Soulful Leader Podcast with your hosts, Stephanie Allen
And Maren Oslack. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to dive deeper, head over to our website at thesoulfulleaderpodcast.com.
Until next time.